My name is Nora Callahan. I am 34 years old. And on a Thursday morning in October, I sat in a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor of a commercial real estate office in Asheville, North Carolina, watching a live security feed on a laptop screen while my ex-husband stood at a notary's desk 2 floors below me and pressed a pen to a piece of paper that bore my forged signature. He was smiling. He shook the notary's hand. He straightened his collar the way he always did when he believed something was finished and settled in his favor. He had absolutely no idea I was there. What he did not know was that the man sitting across that notary's desk, the buyer, his own boss, the man he had spent 2 years trying to impress, had called me personally 6 days earlier on a Sunday evening while I was sitting on my couch in North Asheville with a glass of water and nothing particular on my mind. What he did not know was that in the 6 days between that phone call and this Thursday morning, I had spoken to an attorney, a detective, a county deed registrar, a licensing commission, and the buyer himself, all while Garrett continued to prepare for a closing he believed I knew nothing about. What he did not know was that the real estate attorney sitting 1 floor above him at that very moment was already printing the paperwork that would unwind every transaction, every representation, and every lie he had constructed over the preceding 18 months. I did not cry when I found out. I did not call him. I did not send a message through a mutual friend or post anything on any platform. I did not warn him or threaten him or give him any signal at all that the ground beneath his plan had been completely replaced. I watched the security feed. I took a sip of coffee. I sat with my hands folded on the conference table, and I waited for the elevator doors to open. Before I tell you what happened when my ex-husband finally walked into that room and looked across the table and saw me sitting there, I want to know something first. Where in the world are you watching or listening to this right now? Drop your city, your country, and your local time in the comments below. I am always moved by how far these stories travel, and I want to picture you wherever you are. And if you connect with stories about women who were quietly dismissed, quietly underestimated, and who let their silence do the loudest and most permanent work, please hit like and subscribe. This channel was built for exactly that kind of woman, and for every person who has ever loved one. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, because this story does not start on a Thursday morning in a conference room. It starts years before that, with a cabin in the mountains, a man with a very specific kind of ambition, and a woman who had learned, over a lifetime, to pay very careful attention. His name was Garrett Cole. When I first met him, he was 31 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy confidence that comes not from having earned a great deal, but from having rarely been told no. He managed commercial property listings for a mid-sized firm called Hargrove Realty Group in downtown Asheville. He drove a clean black pickup truck that he washed himself on Sunday mornings. He kept his apartment in a state of deliberate, performative tidiness, which I later came to understand was less about cleanliness and more about the story he wanted visitors to construct about him. He had a laugh that came easily and often, and when he aimed it at you directly, you felt like the most interesting person in whatever room you were sharing. I was 28 when we met. I worked as a licensed landscape architect for a boutique firm called Greenvine Design, which specialized in residential projects on steep mountain terrain, retaining walls, native planting schemes, graded drainage systems for lots that most contractors looked at and quietly declined. I had spent 4 years building my client list from nothing, taking on small projects that nobody else wanted, driving 40 minutes in the rain to hike site surveys alone with a notebook and a measuring tape, writing proposals at kitchen tables at 11 o'clock at night. I was good at it. I was precise about it. And I was also, if I am being honest with you, very good at finding men who needed more belief than they had yet earned, and deciding that I was the right person to provide it. We dated for 14 months before Garrett proposed, on a hiking trail outside Montreat on a clear October afternoon. The ring was a small oval sapphire, which he knew I preferred over diamonds because I had mentioned it in passing 3 months earlier, and I was moved by the fact that he had remembered and filed it away. We got married the following May, on a Saturday, at a venue outside Weaverville with a view of the French Broad River and 63 guests. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings. My best friend from college, a woman named Jana Webb, who now lived in Atlanta and practiced family law, was my maid of honor. She pulled me aside in the dressing room that morning, took both my hands, and said, "You look beautiful and I love you completely, and I want you to remember how this feels right now, no matter what comes after. I told her she was being dramatic. I thought it was just Jana being Jana, sentimental and slightly overwrought the way she always was at significant moments. I understand what she was telling me now. I understood it, in fact, by about the 3rd year of the marriage. But by then, I had already made promises I intended to keep. The cabin belonged to my family in a way that very few things belong to anyone anymore. My grandfather, a man named Robert Callahan, built it by hand in 1971 on 6 acres of land off Ridgecrest Road in the Black Mountains, about 45 minutes east of Asheville. He was not a contractor. He was a high school shop teacher who spent 3 summers hauling lumber and fieldstone up that hillside with 2 neighbors and a borrowed truck. The main structure was 2 bedrooms, a living room with a stone fireplace he had laid himself, rock by rock, carrying each one up from the creek bed at the base of the property, and a back porch that faced directly out at a ridgeline that turned orange and amber, and a specific shade of red in October that I have never seen replicated anywhere else. The screen door made a particular creak at the top of its arc that I had been falling asleep to since I was 7 years old. My grandfather left the cabin to my mother, Louise Callahan, when he passed. My mother left it to me when she passed 8 years ago of a cardiac event that was sudden and without warning on a Wednesday morning in November when I was 26 years old and had just started my 2nd year at Greenvine. The deed was transferred into my name alone. The property taxes were in my name alone. The homeowner's insurance policy was in my name alone. The utility accounts, the maintenance service for the well pump, the records from the exterminator who came every spring, every piece of paper connected to that property had my name and only my name on it. I had paid every bill, every fee, and every tax associated with that cabin for 8 consecutive years without missing a single month. That cabin was the most mine thing I owned. It was also, if I am being completely honest, the place where I still felt most like my mother's daughter, which meant it was the place where I felt most like myself. I brought Garrett to the cabin for the first time in the 3rd month we were dating, on a September weekend when the leaves were just beginning to turn. I watched him walk through the rooms slowly, running his hand along the mantelpiece, opening the back door and stepping onto the porch. He stood there for a long moment, looking out at the ridgeline. I waited for him to say something about the view, or the quiet, or the smell of the air, or the way the light came down through the trees at that particular angle in the early evening. Instead, he turned to me and said, "This is the most valuable piece of real estate you own. Not beautiful, not peaceful, not extraordinary or meaningful, or the kind of place that stays with you. Valuable." I told myself he was thinking practically, the way someone who works in real estate is trained to think, and that it was not a reflection of how he actually experienced the world. I was explaining away something I should have listened to. That was a habit I had with Garrett, and it was one that would take me considerably longer than it should have to break. After we married and settled into our life in Asheville, Garrett began making small suggestions about the cabin. He wanted to renovate the kitchen. He wanted to add a 2nd bathroom. He had an idea for a covered deck addition off the back porch that would increase the property's value by, he estimated, $40,000. I agreed to new gutters and a resurfaced driveway, both of which were genuinely necessary, both of which I paid for from my own account. I did not agree to the larger renovation proposals, partly because I was not interested in turning a handmade cabin into a showroom, and partly because every time Garrett talked about improvements, the conversation eventually found its way to the word investment, and the word investment eventually found its way to the suggestion that we should be thinking about the cabin as an asset rather than a sentimental attachment. And that phrasing, sentimental attachment, had started to feel like a critique I was supposed to accept. 18 months into the marriage, Garrett sat across from me at the kitchen table one evening and laid out a proposal. His boss, a man named Douglas Hargrove, had identified a parcel of undeveloped land outside Black Mountain that was, in Garrett's telling, a generational opportunity. Douglas was organizing a small investor group to acquire it. The projected return was significant, and if we used the cabin as collateral to secure a refinancing line, we could participate at a level that would change the arc of our financial future. He said it with the energy of a man who has rehearsed something and is pleased with how well it has come together. I listened to the entire proposal, then I said no. Once, clearly, without anger, without lengthy explanation. No. Garrett pushed back gently, then a second time with more persistence, then a third time with the particular edge in his voice that meant he had run out of the patience he had decided in advance was sufficient for this conversation. I did not change my answer. The subject did not come up again in that form, and I believed, because I wanted to believe it, that the matter was closed. The marriage came apart in the way that many marriages come apart, not with a single catastrophic event, but with a long accumulation of small withdrawals, each one individually explainable and almost negligible, until one day you do the math and discover that the account has been empty for longer than you knew. Garrett worked later and later. His phone lived face down on every flat surface in the house. He began speaking about Douglas Hargrove with a reverence that I found, in retrospect, more clarifying than anything he ever said about me. Douglas was shrewd. Douglas had vision. Douglas understood how to move in the world in a way that generated outcomes rather than just effort. I sat across from my husband at dinner and listened to him describe his boss in the language of worship, and I began to understand that Garrett's idea of a successful life was one in which he orbited a powerful man closely enough to absorb some of the heat. We separated after 4 years. I moved into a rental in North Asheville. The divorce was finalized 14 months later, on a Tuesday in April, with paperwork that arrived in an envelope and sat on my kitchen counter for 2 days before I opened it. My attorney, a careful and exacting woman named Patricia Odom, who had practiced family and property law in Asheville for 22 years, made one thing absolutely explicit in the settlement agreement. The cabin on Ridgecrest Road was not a marital asset. It had been my sole property before the marriage. It remained my sole property. The deed had never been amended to include Garrett's name. He had no claim to it and no interest in it, legal or otherwise. The paperwork was unambiguous. Patricia was unambiguous. We both believed the matter was settled. I went back to the cabin every other weekend after the divorce. I hiked the Ridge Road in the early morning. I restocked the firewood from the shed. I sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee in the same chair my mother had always used and watched the light change across the ridgeline and thought about what I was building and what I was letting go and what the difference was. I paid the property taxes in September as I always had. $782, same as it had been the year before and the year before that. I renewed the homeowner's insurance in October. I paid the well service invoice in November. I was healing slowly and unevenly, the way that healing actually works as opposed to how it is described, and I was fine. I was genuinely incrementally fine. Then, on a Sunday in early October, at 6:47 in the evening, my phone rang with a local area code I did not recognize. I was sitting on my couch with no particular plans and the television on low, and I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. To this day, I could not tell you exactly what that something was. I think it was the specific quality of silence I had developed over the preceding year, the kind that comes when you have stopped filling your life with noise and can finally hear what was always trying to get through. Is this Nora Callahan? The voice was measured, unhurried, the voice of a man in his mid-50s who was accustomed to conducting serious conversations without raising his pitch. I said that it was. "My name is Douglas Hargrove," he said. "I believe we need to have a conversation." I sat very still. "About what?" I said. He said, "About a property on Ridgecrest Road that your ex-husband has offered to sell me." I want you to understand what that sentence did to the room. It did not make me angry, not immediately. It made me very, very still, the way that a phrase sometimes lands and requires you to sit inside it for a moment before you can think clearly around it. I asked Douglas to tell me everything. He was careful and systematic and clearly uncomfortable, the way honest men are when they realize they have been positioned as instruments in someone else's dishonest plan. He told me that Garrett had approached him approximately 6 weeks earlier with what he described as an off-market opportunity. A mountain cabin on 6 acres, 45 minutes from Asheville, priced at $315,000, offered with a quick close condition because the seller, meaning me, needed the funds promptly to address a business debt. Garrett had provided Douglas with a full listing packet, photographs of the property, a property description, comparables, and a document he referred to as the seller's authorization letter, signed by Nora Callahan, granting Garrett Cole authority to act as her representative in the transaction. I asked Douglas whether he had verified the authorization letter with me directly at any point before the transaction progressed. He said he had not. He said he had trusted the professional representation of a man he employed and had worked alongside for 2 years. He said the closing was scheduled for Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. He said he was calling me now because he had decided, over the preceding 48 hours, that something about the transaction had been bothering him in a way he could not name specifically but could not ignore. A business debt, he had thought. He had never heard Nora Callahan had a business debt. Mr. Hargrove, I said, as calmly as I had ever said anything in my life, I did not sign that letter. I did not authorize any sale. I have not been contacted by any party in this transaction at any point. I have no business debt. My firm is profitable, and I have no outstanding obligations of any kind. There was a silence on the line. Then Douglas said very quietly, I was afraid that was what you were going to say. We spoke for 41 minutes. Douglas was, over the course of that conversation, methodical and honest and genuinely troubled by what he had allowed himself to be positioned within. By the end of the call, he had agreed to cooperate fully with whatever I needed him to do. He was no longer a buyer. He was, quietly and precisely, the most important witness I had. Now, if you are still with me right now, if this story is sitting somewhere in your chest in a way that feels familiar, in a place that recognizes something, I want you to stop for just a moment and leave a comment. Tell me the year you decided your silence meant something different than what other people had decided it meant. Tell me what that felt like. This channel exists because of those moments, and I read every single one. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it right now. Because what I am about to tell you, the 6 days I built in complete silence, that is the part I have been waiting to get to. Stay with me. The 6 days between that Sunday phone call and the Thursday closing were among the most focused days of my life. Not frantic, not emotional in any way that was visible to anyone observing me from the outside. I went to work on Monday. I answered emails. I reviewed a grading plan for a property in Weaverville. I ate lunch at my desk and called no one with any urgency. But underneath that ordinary surface, I was moving with the kind of precision that comes when you have been told, by someone you trusted, that they believed you would never find out, and you have decided to make that belief into the thing that ends them. Monday morning at 8:15, I was sitting across from Patricia Odom in her office on Marymount Avenue with the deed, 8 years of tax receipts, the homeowner's insurance policy, my most recent mortgage-free property statement, and a screenshot of the seller's authorization letter that Douglas had forwarded to me the previous night. Patricia studied the authorization letter for a long time without speaking, turning it slightly under the desk lamp, comparing the signature block against the actual signature on the deed document I had brought with me. Then she looked up and said, with no drama at all, "This is a forgery. The font in the signature block is different from the surrounding text, which tells me the signature was lifted and placed. The date format is wrong. Your actual signature uses a different convention, and the notarial acknowledgement on this document references a county that has not used that particular form language for 3 years. She looked at me steadily. "Nora, this is real estate fraud. It is a felony in the state of North Carolina." I nodded. I said, "I want to do this correctly. I want every step in the right order." Patricia made 2 calls while I was still sitting in her office. The first was to the Buncombe County Register of Deeds, where she had a long professional relationship, and where she requested an immediate protective flag on the Ridgecrest Road property. That flag was entered into the system at 9:08 that morning, which meant that any attempted deed transfer on that property would be intercepted and escalated before it could be recorded. The second call was to the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, the licensing and disciplinary body that had issued Garrett his broker's license 6 years earlier. Patricia reported the forged authorization and the fraudulent listing representation to the Commission's investigative intake line. That complaint was logged and assigned a case number at 9:22. When she hung up, she looked at me and said, "The clock is now running on his license, independent of anything else that happens. That piece does not require your participation to continue." Tuesday, Patricia spent the morning drafting cease and desist letters. There were 3, one directed at Garrett Cole personally, one directed at Hargrove Realty Group as the brokerage of record on the listing, and one directed at the notary services firm that had been retained to execute the closing documents. Each letter specified, in language that left no room for interpretation, that the seller's authorization letter was a forged document, that the named property owner had not consented to any listing or sale, that the property registration had been flagged with the county recorder, and that any party who proceeded with the closing would be named as a defendant in a civil fraud action. The letters were sent by courier and required signature upon delivery. Patricia's office received confirmation that Garrett's at the Hargrove Realty office had been signed for at 2:41 that afternoon. I asked Patricia what she believed Garrett would do next. She took off her reading glasses and set them on the desk and said, "There are two categories of people who engage in document fraud. The ones who run and the ones who double down. The ones who run tend to disappear from the transaction and let it dissolve and then deal with the fallout afterward. The ones who double down construct an alternative narrative and push forward because they believe their version of reality can outlast your version if they say it confidently enough and to enough people." She paused. "I think Garrett is a double down." She was right. She was exactly right. Wednesday evening, Douglas Hargrove called me for the second time. He told me that Garrett had contacted him that afternoon at approximately 4:30, after the cease and desist letter had been delivered, and had told him that the letter was a mistake, a miscommunication, the product of a bitter divorce and an ex-wife who was trying to obstruct the sale for personal and vindictive reasons. He told Douglas that the authorization letter was genuine and that he had documentation to support its authenticity. He told Douglas that the closing was still scheduled for Thursday at 10 in the morning, and that everything was in order and proceeding normally. Douglas had listened to all of it, and then he had called me. "I want to be in that room," he said. "I want to see how this ends." Patricia and I had already spent Wednesday afternoon arranging what that room would look like. Douglas's firm, Hargrove Realty, occupied the 8th and 14th floors of a commercial building on Lexington Avenue in downtown Asheville. The notary firm retained for the closing operated a satellite office on the 12th floor of the same building. Patricia had arranged, through Douglas, for the closing to appear to proceed exactly as scheduled. The notary would be present. The paperwork would be on the desk. Garrett would be expected at 10 o'clock. Douglas would be there as the buyer. What Garrett would not know was that Patricia and I, along with a detective from the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office Economic Crimes Unit named Ray Sellers, a quiet, methodical man of approximately 50, who wore plain clothes and carried a folder under his arm and had agreed to be present as an official observer, would be on the 14th floor in Douglas's personal conference room, with access to the building's security camera system, patched to a laptop screen, watching every moment of it in real time. I did not sleep well on Wednesday night. I lay in bed and looked at the ceiling and thought, as I have thought on many difficult nights, about the cabin. I thought about my grandfather carrying field stones up from the creek bed and laying them in the fireplace without a template, fitting them together by eye and by hand, and by the particular patience of a man who understood that some things have to be done, slowly to be done right. I thought about my mother sitting on the back porch at sunrise with a cup of coffee, not speaking, not moving, just watching the ridgeline the way people watch something they know is temporary but have decided to be fully present for anyway. I thought about the specific smell of that place in October, the mix of wood smoke and cold air, and the pine resin that warmed up in the afternoon sun. I thought about Garrett standing on that porch the first time and saying the word valuable. And I thought about how a word can tell you everything about a person, and you can choose to hear it, or you can choose to explain it away, and that the choice you make in that moment has consequences you will eventually have to reckon with. I was at the building by 9:15 Thursday morning. Patricia was already in the conference room with her laptop open and a yellow legal pad in front of her. Detective Sellers arrived at 9:28 in a dark jacket and unremarkable shoes, carrying his folder with the quiet efficiency of someone who does this regularly and has learned to take up as little space as possible until the right moment. Douglas met us at 9:40 and shook my hand with both of his, which I took as the gesture it was meant to be. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had not slept much either, and I found that appropriate. The building's security team had patched 2 camera feeds to the laptop on the conference table. The first showed the lobby at ground level. The second showed the interior of the notary office on the 12th floor, a small beige room with a long desk, 2 chairs facing each other, a filing cabinet, and a sad-looking plant in the corner that had clearly been surviving rather than thriving for some time. The notary, a woman named Carol, who wore reading glasses on a cord around her neck, and had organized the documents on the desk with the precision of someone who took her work seriously, was already in position. At 9:51, the lobby camera showed Garrett Cole walking through the glass entrance doors. I watched him on the screen, He was wearing a gray blazer over a blue checked shirt, no tie, which told me everything about the calculation he had made. Dressed for easy confidence rather than formal occasion, the sartorial equivalent of a man who believes the outcome is already decided and is choosing his costume accordingly. He was carrying a slim leather portfolio. He said something to the receptionist at the front desk and they both laughed. He looked relaxed. He looked certain. He stepped into the elevator. 90 seconds later, he appeared on the second camera feed, walking into the notary office. He and Carol exchanged brief pleasantries. He set the portfolio on the desk and opened it, sliding documents across to her. I watched her review them, ask him a question, and accept his answer with a nod. I watched him pick up the pen. Patricia put her hand on my forearm, not to stop me, not because I needed stopping, just to let me know she was there. Garrett pressed the pen to the paper with the particular deliberateness of a man performing an action he considers significant. He signed, he set the pen down. He held out his hand to Carol and she shook it. He straightened his collar, the exact same self-congratulatory gesture I had watched 100 times over 4 years. The unconscious small celebration that meant he believed something was finished and done and in his favor. Douglas's phone buzzed on the table. He turned it over and showed me the screen. A text from Garrett. Signed and done. See you in 5. Douglas looked at me. Ready? I said yes. We took the stairs from 14 to 12 because Patricia felt that the few seconds of additional time would be useful, and I agreed with her. Douglas went through the door first. I came in directly behind him. I watched Garrett's face move through 3 distinct expressions in the space of about 2 seconds. The warm, automatic smile of a man expecting to see his boss and complete a transaction. Then the confusion of seeing someone else in a doorway where someone else was not expected. And then something that was not quite fear, but was that immediate neighbor of fear that lives in the body before the mind has caught up. Patricia came in behind me. Detective Sellers entered last and closed the door with the quiet precision of a man who has closed a great many doors in a great many rooms and knows exactly what that sound communicates. Garrett looked at me. His mouth opened and nothing came out, which was more honest than most things he had said to me in the last 2 years of our marriage. I sat down in the empty chair across from him at the notary's desk. I folded my hands on the table the way my mother used to fold her hands when she had thought something through completely and was ready to say it without ceremony. "Hello, Garrett," I said. He looked at Douglas. Douglas looked back at him with the expression of a man who has decided he is done performing ignorance. "What is this?" Garrett said. His voice was working to find its normal register and not quite getting there. "Nora, what are you doing here? This is a professional transaction and you have no right to." "I have every right," I said. "The property is mine. I have a signed authorization that says—" "You have a document you created," Patricia said from her position near the wall. She said it without inflection, as a simple statement of recorded fact. "We have the original deed in my client's name. We have 8 years of uninterrupted tax payment records. We have a protective flag filed with the Buncombe County Register of Deeds, entered Monday morning at 9:08. We have a formal complaint submitted to the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, assigned a case number Monday morning at 9:22. We have forensic analysis of the forged authorization letter, documenting typeface inconsistencies, and a misapplied notarial form. And we have Detective Ray Sellers from the Buncombe County Sheriff's Economic Crimes Unit, who is present as an official observer." She looked at Garrett with the calm of a woman who has been doing this for 22 years. "Whether this morning results in a criminal referral is currently a function of what you say in the next few minutes." Garrett looked at Detective Sellers. His jaw worked. He looked back at me. I watched his face go through the specific and irreversible process of a man who has discovered that the architecture of his plan, every assumption, every calculation, every underestimation, has been systematically and completely replaced while he was performing confidence in a notary's office. He looked at the signed document on Carol's desk. He looked at Carol, who had gone very still and was looking at a point on the wall approximately 6 inches above anyone's head. He looked at Douglas. Douglas looked at the wall behind Garrett's left shoulder and said nothing at all. "Doug," Garrett said. His voice had dropped to something just above a whisper. "I can explain this. You do not need to explain it to me," Douglas said. He said it with the flat, final quietness of a man who has made a decision and does not intend to revisit it. "You need to explain it to her." Garrett turned to me. I watched his face attempt to locate the expression it had always used when he needed me to adjust my perception of something he had done. The reasonable expression, the patient expression, the expression that said, I am the calm con here, and your emotion is the problem in this room. He found some version of it and aimed it across the table with the muscle memory of 4 years of practice. Nora, he said, you have to understand that this cabin has been sitting empty half the year. You are paying taxes and insurance on a property that is generating nothing. $315,000 is a fair market price. You could eliminate your business debt entirely and still have capital left to. I do not have a business debt, I said. He stopped. I have never had a business debt. Greenvine Design has been profitable for 3 consecutive years. My accountant can confirm that in a single 5-minute phone call. You invented the business debt as the narrative hook that would make a quick close seem plausible to a buyer. You knew Douglas well enough to know he would respond to urgency if it was framed as financial practicality. The pen was still on the desk between us. Garrett looked at it for a long time. Carol the notary had, slowly and without drawing attention to herself, slid the signed closing document out from the center of the desk into her own folder, which she quietly closed. Garrett looked at me. The performance had run out of material. What was left underneath it was something I had not seen on his face before. Not remorse, not regret, not the kind of self-recognition that leads anywhere useful, but simply exhaustion. The specific exhaustion of a man who built something complicated on an unstable foundation and has just watched it finish collapsing. I did not think you would find out, he said. He said it to the middle of the table, not to me, not to Douglas, not to anyone in the room specifically, just to the air, the way people say true things when they have run out of the energy required to make the truth sound like something else. I sat with those words for a moment. I did not think you would find out. Not I am sorry. Not I was wrong. Not I do not know what I was thinking, or I panicked, or I made a terrible mistake and I understand the weight of it. Just the bare, exhausted admission that the entire plan had been constructed on the assumption of my ignorance, and my ignorance had not cooperated. Patricia stepped forward. Mr. Cole, here is what happens from this point. The property registration flag remains active. No deed transfer will be recorded. The Real Estate Commission complaint proceeds independently of anything that occurs in this room. That process is outside my client's control now and outside yours. The notarized document on that desk is void because the underlying authorization was fraudulent, and the notary has been formally notified of that fact. Mr. Hargrove will not be purchasing this property, and my client retains the option, entirely at her discretion, to pursue civil damages and to refer this matter for criminal prosecution. I would strongly recommend that you contact your own attorney before the end of today. Garrett looked at me one last time. I think he was waiting for something. A softening, perhaps. A pause that might mean the door was still open for a different outcome. I did not give him one. I want you to understand something, I said. You did not try to steal a piece of real estate. You tried to sell the last place on earth where I still feel my grandfather's hands in the walls. You tried to convert my mother's Sunday morning porch into a closing cost. You built a forgery on top of a family that had already trusted you and been wrong to do it, and you did it to impress a man who, as of this morning, will no longer be your employer. Garrett flinched at that last part, hard enough that it was visible. I stood up. I picked up my bag from the floor beside my chair. Patricia will be in touch about the civil matter. I think you should use the rest of this morning to call your attorney. I walked to the door. Detective Sellers held it open. I stepped into the hallway. The building went on around me. Elevator chimes, someone's phone, 2 people at the far end of the corridor discussing a lunch order. The ordinary world completely intact. I was standing inside it, breathing, whole, holding every single thing that had been mine to hold. The fallout arrived in the orderly, inexorable way that real consequences arrive when they have been properly prepared. Not all at once, not dramatically, but wave by wave, each one following logically from the last. Within 48 hours of Thursday morning, Garrett was placed on administrative suspension by Hargrove Realty, pending the outcome of the Real Estate Commission investigation. Douglas issued a short internal memo to the firm's 22 employees stating that an agent had been found to have materially misrepresented a property transaction and that the matter had been referred to the appropriate regulatory bodies. He did not use Garrett's name. He did not need to. By Friday afternoon, Garrett's personal items had been moved from his desk to a box in the building's mailroom. The Real Estate Commission completed their preliminary review over the following 6 weeks. They forwarded their findings to the North Carolina Attorney General's office with a recommendation for further action. The formal determination that Garrett Cole had fraudulently represented himself as an authorized seller's agent using a forged instrument was issued on a Wednesday morning in early December. His broker's license was suspended for a minimum of 2 years pending a full disciplinary hearing. The hearing was scheduled for the following spring. Patricia filed the civil complaint on the 3rd of November. We were seeking compensatory and punitive damages totaling $87,000, which accounted for the costs of the emergency deed flag, forensic document analysis, Patricia's legal fees through the filing date, and a calculated figure representing the demonstrable harm to the property's market integrity from the unauthorized listing that had circulated within the commercial real estate community. Garrett's attorney responded within 2 weeks requesting mediation. Patricia told me we would decline and that she believed we would prevail decisively at trial. I believed Patricia. On a Friday evening in the 3rd week of November, my phone buzzed at 11:20 with a text from a number I did not recognize. I would find out later it was Garrett's older sister calling from her phone on his behalf. The message read, "He is genuinely sorry, Nora. He made a terrible mistake, and he knows it, and he is asking whether there is any chance you would consider dropping the civil suit. He is already losing his license. He is asking if you could find it in your heart to let this one piece go." I read the message sitting on the edge of my bed. I turned off the lamp. In the morning I forwarded it to Patricia with a single line. "Please ensure all future contact goes through counsel only." That was the last message I received from Garrett or anyone acting on his behalf. I want to tell you something now about what this experience taught me, because I think it is the thing that actually matters, not the security feed, not the conference room, not the moment his face changed. Those are satisfying to describe, and they are true, but they are not the lesson. I spent several years of my life in that marriage, explaining away things I had already understood. I explained away the word valuable on the back porch. I explained away the refinancing proposal. I explained away the 3 times he brought up the cabin in the last months before we separated, each time testing the edges of a plan he had not yet committed to. I explained them away because the alternative, accepting what they told me clearly and directly, would have required me to act, and acting felt harder and more costly than continuing to give the benefit of a doubt that was not being earned. What I want to say to you, if you are in any version of that situation right now, is this. The explaining away is not kindness, it is not generosity, it is not the charitable interpretation of a complicated person. It is a form of disappearing yourself, one small accommodation at a time, until you have become someone who cannot be seen clearly, even by the people who are supposed to love you. The knowing comes before the readiness. I knew things about Garrett before I was ready to act on what I knew. But the readiness did come. It always comes if you keep paying attention. The cabin is still on Ridgecrest Road. On the Saturday following that Thursday, I drove up after work and let myself in through the back door and sat on the porch for an hour in the cold, without speaking to anyone or reading anything or looking at my phone. The ridgeline was bare and gray and absolutely still. The fireplace inside still smelled like the oak wood my grandfather had cut from the property line himself and stacked in the shed every autumn. The screen door still made its creak at the top of its arc. The chair where my mother used to sit was where it had always been, faded green fabric, one armrest worn smooth. I sat there until the light was gone. I thought about what it means to protect something. Not defensively, not out of fear, but because some things are worth the precision and the patience and the 6 days of focused silence that it takes to do it correctly. My grandfather carried stones up a hillside for 3 summers, because he understood that a fireplace built right will outlast the person who builds it. My mother sat on that porch without speaking, because she understood that some things communicate more clearly in silence than they ever could in words. I think they would both have understood exactly what I did. I think they would have considered it the most natural thing. Jana Webb called me on that Sunday, the day after I went back to the cabin. I told her everything from the Sunday phone call to the Thursday conference room, and she listened without interrupting, which for Jana is an act of considerable discipline. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "Do you remember what I told you in the dressing room the morning of your wedding?" I did. I told her I had spent the last 18 months understanding it, at a level I had not been capable of on that morning. She laughed, and the laugh had relief in it, the kind that sounds like something has been put down after a long carry. "You already knew, Nora," she said. "You have always known. You just needed to get tired enough of carrying the weight of other people's stories about you before you could pick up your own. That is the truest sentence anyone said to me that year. The knowing comes before the readiness. The readiness, when it arrives, is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It just appears one evening in the form of a phone call you almost didn't answer, and from that moment on you know exactly what you are going to do, and in what order, and the only thing left is to do it. If you are in the place right now where you know but are not yet ready, I see you. You do not owe anyone a performance of uncertainty you no longer feel. You do not owe anyone a preview of what you have already figured out. Build it in silence. Keep your receipts. Pay your property taxes. Answer the phone call you almost let go to voicemail. And when the room is ready, walk into it. Tell me something in the comments. Has there ever been a person in your life who underestimated you so fundamentally, so consistently, that when the truth finally came out in full view of everyone, you almost felt something close to pity for how wrong they had been? Tell me what that felt like. I read every single one of these. Every single one. I will see you in the next story. I want to take a moment before you go, and I mean this genuinely, to thank you for staying with this story all the way through. You gave it your time and your attention, and that is not a small thing. This channel exists because there are women whose stories deserve to be told with the same precision and care that they were lived with. Slowly, honestly, without gloating, and with the specific kind of dignity that only comes from knowing you were right all along and being patient enough to let the room find out on its own. If Nora's story stayed with you, if some part of it recognized something in your own life, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe if you have not already. We release a new story every single day because the women who build their victories in silence deserve an audience that shows up for them consistently. That is what we are here for. That is what this community is built on. Thank you for being part of it. I will see you tomorrow, right here, with another story about a woman who stopped explaining herself and started letting the truth do the work.